Hello, everyone. Let me just make sure that I sound okay. Apologies if you hear anything going on outside in the background. I'm Steven Schinder, co-host of Yesshift, going live to talk a bit about Rush. And their first album actually came out 50 years ago this month. I saw somewhere that today, March 18th, was the 50th anniversary, but then I've also seen other places say that March 1st was the anniversary, including like in this particular magazine that came out not too long ago. Let me just hold it up to the camera. So that's magazine says Rush 55 years of rock's most powerful trio. And of course, uh, the band pretty much ended several years ago. So the 55 years on there is more like how long the world has like had their music. Because this magazine, I found it at I think it was at a Walmart. Um, Dad and I were hanging out. This was back in December when Dad came to town and he was doing a trip through California. And we ended up at a Walmart and I was browsing and I found this. So I got one for me, one for him. And yeah, so Rush, the band, was founded in 68, but then, there were personnel changes. And several years later, 1974 was when their first album, their self titled debut album, came out. And uh, their drummer at the time was John Rutsey, and then from the second album onward was Neil Peart. Um, so let's talk about the first album firstly. So looking back, and I'm sure a lot of you already know that this is a band that was influenced by Yes and even Genesis and Pink Floyd, as I think Alex Lifeson is quoted as saying in this magazine. So the first Rush album, it felt very different from what would come after. Like it kind of feels a bit more carefree, and they've said that John Rutsey was more a straight ahead rock drummer, and you definitely get that vibe on this album. So on side one, you have "Finding My Way," "Need Some Love," "Take a Friend," "Here Again," and then on side two, you've got "What You're Doing," "In the Mood," "Before and After," and "Working Man." And yeah, these do have like somewhat of a young, carefree attitude, maybe a bit of naivete to them, which you kind of get with some other bands in their early stages, even the first Yes album. So, yeah, we've basically had 50 years of Rush music being with us from this release onward. And there's some interesting stuff. You get like a more bluesy feel in places, like on Here Again for example. Sorry, I almost like mixed up my words there. Um, and like my dad and Lou Calderola, who is with Limelight, the Rush tribute, they talked about Rush and like celebrated the anniversary in their own way yesterday on a Drum Talk TV spin-off show, or I guess one of the multiple shows on there called Under the Influence, where they talk about their influences. So they talked about Rush and what it means to them and their drumming, and even shared a couple videos of them playing, Lou playing to The Best I Can from their second album, Fly By Night, and Dad playing to Middletown Dreams, one of their 80s tracks. So yeah, go ahead and check that out when you have the chance. Um, and yeah, one of the things that were mentioned is that you hear the word baby in some of the music here. I think on In the Mood, and they're like, yeah, you wouldn't hear that so much on later Rush albums. That kind of reminded me of when Steve Howe said sometime recently over the last couple of years that on Yes Music you wouldn't hear the word baby really, which made me want to like figure out if that's actually true, but I just haven't taken the time to really do a thorough look. Um, but yeah, and on before and after, the penultimate track on this debut album. Funny enough, the title kind of reminds of Beyond and Before, the opening track on Yes's debut album, but it begins with a more sort of introspective, reflective mood before shifting gears and sounding more like the rest of this album. And I don't know if I'm the odd one out, but I listening to that song, I kind of felt, oh man, I kind of wish we got to more of that introspective feel throughout this song. And Working Man, of course, it goes without saying that that became like such an anthem for, one of the things that my dad and Lou, as well as this magazine that I just showed you, mention is that there's some stuff for like the blue collar types on this album. And so I think it's a nice album to revisit, and there's stuff to like on it, of course, but obviously like Rush really evolved like over the decades. It was kind of gradual, of course, from album to album, but you listen to something from the 70s and something way later and it's like, whoa, what went on here? um when they brought Neil into the band, he was also a lyricist, and so they got more into the proggy vibe and really evolved their sound. And so, and that trio of Getty, Alex, and Neil stuck together for such a long time. It's tough to achieve a consistent lineup with bands like that. So I look at that as like a really, I don't know, it's very inspirational in its way, how it really feels like it was a brotherhood. With some bands you get some of that, but not quite to that degree, if that makes sense. So the way that Rush stuck it out, and of course, needing to take a break when tragedy struck, which very understandable, but then later, after processing things, being able to come back and put out a few more strong albums before calling it a day. Like, it's just really inspiring the way they were able to do that. Now, in this magazine, this I don't think you can get it from stands anymore because on here it says display until February 19th, 2024. But yeah, it's actually a pretty quick read. Not too long ago, maybe several months ago now, I talked about the magazine that talked about Yes and its 55 years or whatever of music. And I think that one might have been a bit more text heavy, but it's still, I still feel like there were some things they could have gone deeper into. But of course, as it's been pointed out, it's a magazine, so there's only so much you can do. So that kind of primed me for this particular magazine on Rush. And I was a little surprised how it felt less text heavy, but I still felt like somewhat primed for those expectations. I do wish it had gone a little bit more like talking about John Rutsey. There's a little bit about him. It does mention Jeff Jones as well, but it's by and large mainly focused on the trio. And I knew that it wouldn't go album by album. There are other things that go in depth like that. Like really going from Geddy Lee's memoir, My Effin' Life, which I reviewed not too long ago, and then going into this, it's such a stark contrast in terms of like how deep it goes into things. Like it does talk about some of the styles and influences on the band members, but yeah, it's a very quick read. So I would say something like this would probably be more for, well, you could give it to well, if you're lucky to find it these days, like give it to someone who's just getting into the band and doesn't know the deep history and kind of knows the base, just needs to know the basics as a starting point. And so this would satisfy that type of fan. For the more um, really deep into Rush fans, I think the photos, there might be some photos in here that maybe people haven't seen. I know there were definitely some that I'd never seen before. And there are interview quotes sourced from various other places. So you get like a bunch of different stuff here. I see we're getting a comment here. Robert Nasir, as proggy as Yes, as cerebral as King Crimson, and as rock and roll as Led Zeppelin, Rush were slash are simply majestic. Huge respect, perhaps my second favorite band. Yeah, they might be my second favorite as well. Like in terms of how Yes is number one for me. I know their discography intimately, but Rush might possibly be my second favorite. I do like how this magazine, as basic and like somewhat bare bones as it is, it does touch on some perhaps slightly uh some info that might be slightly obscure to some people, but I do quite like how it ends on this note of like, is Rush over? Well, their music is forever, that type of thing. Um, the way that they list their discography is, they list the studio albums on one page and the live albums on the next page, but the layout is kind of strange. Like you get the instead of left to right and then go down, it's kind of start from the top, go down, then the next column start from top, go down. It's like really strange to me, but yeah, each album gets like a little summary, and the magazine also kind of divides Rush into three different eras. The prog era, which technically they say started with when Neil joined, which kind of strange way to divide it. It's like, does the debut album also count in that era? Like, what's going on here? And then from Signals to Show of Hands, and before that, Hold Your Fire. Like, this calls that the synth era, which makes sense because, you'd get Getty on the synth, which was controversial at the time. And then Presto, 1989's Presto onward is called the guitar era, um, which is kind of that's a huge era though, like 1989 to 2012. Sometimes it feels kind of silly to me when certain articles or publications will classify an era from like I'm sure somewhere I've read for Yes, it's like Keys to Ascension to the present are one era, and it's like that's almost 30 years. That's such a huge era. Uh, Robert chimes in again saying, "Too cool to see Geddy Lee take the late Chris Squire's place to of honor for roundabout a Yes's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Of course, Rush's earlier induction was too cool and due to Alex damn funny. Yeah, when Alex did the blah 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 thing. Yeah, like there were lots of things going on with the Yes Hall of Fame induction ceremony. We've heard and read like different perspectives on that, but it was cool seeing Getty play a bit of Yes, and he's talked about how Chris Squire is a huge influence on him in this magazine and in his memoir. For me, my introduction to Rush was maybe 2002, 2003. Dad showed me the Rush in Rio live DVD, and I wasn't quite ready for Rush at the time. I was still in the oh Yes is the only band I'll ever love type of um like way of thinking, and watching this DVD and not being quite ready for that style and like the CGI dragon that would show up randomly. It's like what's going on here? But in 2008, around the time I turned 14, I was exploring more prog rock bands, and Rush was one of them. And I got through their discography. And so Clockwork Angels was the pretty much the only Rush studio album that came out while I was a fan. I think before that, Dad would play Snakes and Arrows, and I was kind of getting into it, but like getting into the full discography, it was like, okay, yeah, now I am fully a Rush fan. I feel, and Clockwork Angels is my favorite Rush album. I love the stuff that it says about life, and the closing track, The Garden, in particular, just such a beautiful track. And it's like, what a great way to cap off the studio discography. And I got to see them um, when visiting Dad in Vegas back in 2012. So we saw that tour, the Clockwork Angels tour, and the production was so good, and I recognized Jay Baruchel in the video stuff that they would show of like the in-universe Clockwork Angels stuff, and like sonically and just the performances were so incredible. Um, and Also, like very recently, there was this show on Paramount Plus. It's had 4 episodes called Getty Lee Asks Are Bass Players Human? I think that's what it's called. Uh, are bass players human too? Okay, so yeah, Getty Lee asks, are bass players human too? And there were 4 episodes of this that came out back in September, and I only just got around to watching it. I don't know why it took me 3 months to get around to it, but I'm glad that I did. It's a very chill, laid back show. Basically, Geddy Lee hanging out with these bassists. Like he got Les Claypool, Robert Trujillo, Melissa Oftermower. I forgot how to pronounce that, and Chris Novoselic. So you get them hanging out, and you'll have them outside or an outdoor setting, or you'll have Getty uh, being like in an airplane as they're piloting, and you hear the song "Fly by Night" playing, um, and yeah, like just laid back, like sort of a day in the life. What do these people like to do, and what is it about their style that they talk about? And I was actually surprised that each of these episodes were only 20 minutes long. I was kind of expecting they'd be like 45 minutes. So the 20-minute run times kind of worked for my schedule, but I do think they could have gone a bit deeper if they'd gone with like a 45-minute runtime. I kind of wonder if maybe the network or something, maybe uh, this is all speculation. I don't know like anything, but maybe they were told that they had to make these like sort of comparatively bite-sized, because maybe that would get more viewers or something. Like I don't know how any of this works, but yeah, regardless, it's nice comfort food stuff to watch, and seeing these musicians just hang out, and you even get to see a performance. So yeah, I won't spoil too much, but yeah, it's a decent watch, and I think people will get some enjoyment out of it. So yeah, I really do think that Rush left such a huge legacy, and did such a great job, like great musicianship, and they really respected each other. And it's just, it's really cool to see that it with people that we consider our heroes, and seeing that that is indeed authentic. So I'm sure there's a lot more I could say about Rush and Fat Dan and Dan. I'm so used to saying like both Dad and Dan when depending on like who I'm talking to, because I have to like talk to other people about, oh, Dan said that this is when we have to have the meeting or whatever. But yeah, Dad and Lou could probably go on for a while as well about Rush. Um, oh, Amy David Valentine chiming in saying my favorite band. Okay, yeah, interesting. There's definitely overlap between Yes fandom and Rush fandom because prog rock. um, but what's interesting about Rush compared to other prog rock bands is there's not as much overlap in terms of like people in different prog bands knowing each other. Maybe it's because of a lot of those are in the UK and Europe, and Rush is of course Canadian. But yeah, they really left a mark in prog rock and in rock in general because some of their tracks made it into the mainstream, of course. So you have people who really love Rush's music, but also like people. There are people who are in the know about Rush's history, but I've also encountered people here and there who aren't sure like who's still around um or like if they're even still going, and it's interesting that you still see like people who love the music but are not super tuned in as to like what's gone on with the band. And Robert chimes in again saying, I attended the book tour in Detroit, and Getty keeps hinting that he and Alex will be doing something, and even teases that it might go under the Rush name. Time will tell, and soon, I think. Either way, no one can say that Rush didn't give us a feast of amazing music over the course of 40 years. Yeah, I totally agree. And using the Rush name, I mean, that's another discussion entirely. Like, there are mixed feelings about that. But I think whatever happens, Getty and Alex have given a lot of thought to whatever that next thing might be. So we'll just have to see. And Amy chimes in again saying, while Moving Pictures is great and gets the most mainstream attention, I feel like Hemispheres as an album is their most proggy. Okay, yeah, it's definitely more of the prog stuff. Yeah, like Moving Pictures is. I guess there are some proggy bits on it, but it's not the first thing I would think of when I think of prog rock. That Moving Pictures album, as incredible as it is. But yeah, Hemispheres, that's a great pick. All right, so I think I'm gonna head off now and go listen to some Rush or just any of these other prog rock bands that have left such a huge mark, or some newer ones that are trying to leave their mark, because there is a great variety of new stuff or older obscure stuff. Like there is a lot to discover, contrary to what some people might say. All right, so thanks for tuning in. And the next time that we go live on Yesshift, me and Dad together, I think that'll be on Thursday, the 21st. Just double checking the time for that. Yeah, so it looks like tentatively we'll be on at 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern on Thursday, March 21st, celebrating the 30th anniversary of Yes's Talk album. So feel free to send in your thoughts on that. I'll be posting about it ahead of time so you can comment. And you could even email yesshiftpodcast@gmail.com with your thoughts on that album. And again, you can find Yes Shift on Facebook, YouTube, or various podcast apps. Just type Yes Shift, you'll probably find us. And yeah, go check out the Under the Influence stuff that I mentioned. I'll I'll link them in the comments after I head off. But yeah, thanks everyone, and catch you all later.